Marcus Chen sat quietly in the back row of the Galactic Military Strategy classroom, his fingers tracing absent patterns on his datapad, while Professor Kethvar droned on about basic fleet formations. Around him, students from dozens of species took frantic notes, their various appendages clicking, scratching, and tapping as they struggled to keep up with the Zentorian instructor's rapid-fire delivery. The Draconian student beside him, Vextar, leaned over with a concerned whistle through his breathing slits. "Human Marcus, you are not recording the lesson. Do you not fear failure in tomorrow's examination?" Marcus glanced up with a gentle smile, his brown eyes reflecting a strange calmness that seemed to unnerve many of his classmates. "I'll be fine, thanks for worrying about me, though." The Academy ship Convergence was humanity's first real step into galactic society. After making contact with the Galactic Council 3 years ago, Earth had been granted permission to send their brightest young minds to the prestigious Nexus Military Academy. Out of billions of applicants, only 50 humans had been selected, and Marcus Chen had been among them. What his classmates didn't know was that Marcus had once commanded the entirety of humanity's war machine. The thought brought a familiar weight to his chest, but he pushed it aside as Professor Kethvar's attention suddenly focused on him. The insectoid professor's compound eyes glittered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as academic malice. Since our human student seemed so confident in his knowledge, perhaps he would care to demonstrate his understanding of the Kandorian pincer formation. A ripple of uncomfortable energy passed through the classroom. The Kandorian pincer was notoriously complex, requiring the coordination of multiple fleet elements across vast distances. Most students didn't encounter it until their 3rd year, yet here was a first-year human being asked to explain it. Marcus stood slowly, his movements fluid and unhurried. At 6 feet tall, he was average for a human but towered over many of his alien classmates. His appearance was unremarkable by human standards, with short black hair, gentle features, and clothes that always seemed slightly too large for his frame. He had the look of someone who had deliberately chosen to be forgettable. "The Kandorian pincer formation," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber without seeming raised, "is designed to exploit the natural tendency of defending forces to concentrate their firepower on the most obvious threat." He moved to the holographic display at the front of the class, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. The display lit up with a 3-dimensional representation of space, dotted with ship icons. "You begin with what appears to be a standard frontal assault," he continued, manipulating the display to show a large fleet advancing directly toward a defended position. "The enemy naturally responds by reinforcing their forward positions and bringing their reserve forces to bear on what they perceive as your main attack." Several students leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. Even Professor Kethvar's mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking. However, the frontal assault is actually comprised of expendable units with enhanced shielding and jamming equipment. Their job isn't to break through, but to hold attention and survive long enough for the real attack to develop. Marcus's hands moved again, and the display showed 2 smaller fleets materializing from seemingly empty space, one above and one below the main battle. While the enemy is focused forward, your primary strike forces, having approached through hyperspace using carefully calculated microjumps, emerge simultaneously at the enemy's flanks. The formation resembles a pincer, hence the name. But the true brilliance, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a subtle intensity that made several students unconsciously lean back, lies not in the pincer itself but in the timing of the collapse. You don't simply attack from 3 sides. You coordinate the withdrawal of your frontal forces with the engagement of your flanking forces, creating a temporary power vacuum that draws enemy reserves out of position just as your real attack begins. The holographic display showed the complex dance of ships, with the central force falling back as the flanking forces struck, then surging forward again as the enemy tried to reposition. It was beautiful and terrifying in its precision. The enemy finds themselves overextended, with their reserves committed to pursuing what they think is a retreating force, while your flanking elements slice through their weakened defensive lines. By the time they realize what's happening, their formation has already collapsed. Professor Kethvar's compound eyes had grown wider throughout the explanation. "That is remarkably accurate. However, you speak as though you have witnessed this formation in actual combat. The Kandorian pincer has not been used in warfare for over 2 centuries." A moment of silence stretched through the classroom. Marcus realized he had said too much, revealed too much of the tactical mindset that had once made him the youngest Grand Admiral in human history. He could feel the weight of his classmates' stares, could see the questions forming in their alien features. "I've read extensively about historical battles," he said simply, returning to his seat with the same unhurried movements. "Old Earth military archives are quite detailed." The explanation seemed to satisfy most of the class, but Marcus caught the calculating look in Professor Kethavar's compound eyes. The Zentorian had spent decades studying military history and tactics. He knew the difference between academic knowledge and practical understanding. As the lesson continued, Marcus forced himself to pay attention to the basic material being covered, occasionally taking notes to maintain the appearance of a struggling student. Inside, however, his mind was elsewhere, remembering a very different time when he had used variations of the Kandorian pincer to devastating effect against humanity's enemies. The Zerathi War had been humanity's crucible, a conflict that had nearly ended their species before they ever reached the stars. Marcus had been 28 when he took command of Earth's combined fleets, the youngest person ever given such responsibility. In the 3 years that followed, he had developed tactics that were studied in military academies across human space, innovations that had saved humanity from extinction. But victory had come at a cost that still haunted his dreams. When the bell chimed to signal the end of class, Marcus gathered his things quietly while his classmates filed out in their various groups. As he reached the door, Professor Kethavar's voice stopped him. "Mr. Chen, a moment of your time." Marcus turned, keeping his expression neutral. "Yes, Professor?" "Walk with me," Kethavar said, his multiple legs carrying him out into the academy's main corridor. "Tell me, what do you think of our curriculum so far?" "It's comprehensive," Marcus replied carefully. "The academy has an excellent reputation throughout the galaxy." "Indeed it does. We pride ourselves on preparing the next generation of military leaders for the complex challenges they will face." Kethavar paused near one of the large viewport windows that lined the corridor, gazing out at the stars beyond. "Yet I find myself curious about Earth's military traditions. Your species is remarkably new to galactic society, yet your government felt confident enough to send students to our most advanced programs." Marcus joined the professor at the window, watching a transport shuttle dock with one of the Academy's auxiliary bays. "Humanity has always believed in reaching for the stars, Professor, even when we couldn't quite grasp them yet." Kethavar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Tell me, Mr. Chen, what did you do before coming to the Academy?" "Your application file simply states military consultant without elaboration," the question Marcus had been dreading since his arrival. His official records had been carefully sanitized, his true identity buried under layers of classification that even the Galactic Council couldn't penetrate. As far as anyone at the Academy knew, Marcus Chen was simply another bright young human looking to make his mark in galactic society. "I helped train Earth's defense forces," he said, which was technically true, mostly theoretical work, war games, and simulations. "I see." Professor Kethavar's compound eyes studied Marcus intently. "Well, I look forward to seeing how your theoretical knowledge serves you in our practical exercises. Tomorrow we begin combat simulations." As the professor moved away, Marcus remained at the window, watching the stars and remembering another time when he had looked out into space and seen not wonder, but the approaching ships of humanity's enemies. He had been a very different person then, driven by necessity and the weight of an entire species' survival. Now he was just trying to be a student, to learn and grow and perhaps find some measure of peace in the process, but he was beginning to suspect that his past would not stay buried as easily as he had hoped. The combat simulation chamber hummed with energy as dozens of students took their positions at individual command pods. Each pod contained a sophisticated neural interface that would allow them to control virtual fleets in real-time combat scenarios. Marcus settled into his assigned pod, running his fingers along the smooth alien controls while his classmates chattered nervously around him. Lieutenant Commander Zeftos, a battle-scarred Aquarian veteran, stood at the front of the chamber with his translucent blue skin rippling in patterns that indicated stern authority. "Today you will face your first tactical simulation. The scenario is simple. Defend the mining colony of Kepler 442b against a raiding force of unknown composition and strength." Marcus's podmate for the exercise was Lyra Voss, a Centaurian whose 4 arms allowed her to operate multiple control systems simultaneously. Her silver eyes held intelligence and determination. Though Marcus had noticed, she seemed unusually interested in his performance during previous classes. "You're very quiet during briefings," Lyra observed, as they calibrated their shared fleet command. "Most humans I've met are much more expressive." Marcus smiled politely while reviewing their available resources. They had been assigned a standard defensive flotilla, 2 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 12 fighter squadrons. Adequate for most threats, but Marcus's experienced eye immediately identified several potential weaknesses in their formation options. "I find it's better to listen first. Speak second," he replied, his fingers moving across the tactical display with unconscious efficiency. "What's your preferred command style? Aggressive forward defense or layered fallback positions?" Lyra's eye stalks twitched with surprise. "Those are second-year tactical concepts. How do you know about defensive deployment theory?" Before Marcus could answer, the simulation began. The holographic display filled with the blue-white marble of Kepler 442b, its 3 orbital mining platforms clearly visible against the star field. Warning indicators immediately began flashing as sensor contacts appeared at the edge of the system. "Unknown vessels approaching," the simulation's AI announced in its neutral tone. "Configuration suggests raider composition. Estimated arrival time, 14 minutes. Around them, Marcus could hear other student pairs arguing about positioning and resource allocation. Some were panicking at the size of the incoming force, while others seemed frozen by the complexity of the tactical situation. Marcus, however, felt a familiar calm settle over him as the old patterns of command reasserted themselves. "Lyra, I need you to position our heavy cruisers here and here," he said quietly, indicating positions on the tactical display that seemed almost random. "Put the destroyers in a screening formation, but keep them mobile. I want them ready to reposition on my signal." "That formation leaves the primary mining platform completely exposed," Lyra protested. "Standard doctrine calls for overlapping defensive fields around all strategic assets." "Standard doctrine assumes you're fighting a standard enemy," Marcus replied, his eyes tracking the approaching raider fleet. "Look at their approach vector and formation spacing. These aren't random pirates. They're using modified hegemony attack patterns." Lyra's silver eyes widened. The hegemony had been an extinct empire for over a century, their tactical doctrines studied only by military historians. "How could you possibly identify their formation from this distance?" Marcus didn't answer immediately, his attention focused on the developing battle. The raiders were indeed using hegemony tactics, but with subtle modifications that suggested someone had studied the old records and adapted them for modern warfare. It was exactly the kind of evolution Marcus had expected to see as younger commanders built upon historical foundations. "Trust me," he said simply. "When they commit to their primary attack, they'll concentrate on the main mining platform. That's when we hit them." The raider fleet swept into the system like a pack of predators, their ships moving in the characteristic spiral formation that had made the hegemony so feared in its time. As Marcus had predicted, they ignored the smaller platforms and drove straight for the primary mining facility with its valuable rare earth extractors. "Now," Marcus said, his voice carrying quiet authority that made Lyra's hands move before her conscious mind could object. Their heavy cruisers, positioned at what had seemed like useless angles, suddenly revealed their purpose as they opened fire on the raiders' flanks. The enemy formation, committed to their attack run, couldn't respond effectively to the crossfire. Meanwhile, the destroyer screen Marcus had positioned came sweeping in from behind, catching the raiders between multiple fields of fire. "Impossible," Lyra breathed as the simulation showed raider ships exploding in brilliant flowers of light. "You anticipated their exact attack pattern." The battle was over in minutes, with the raider fleet completely destroyed and minimal damage to the defending forces. Around them, Marcus could hear the sounds of other teams struggling with their simulations, explosions and alarms indicating failures throughout the chamber. Lieutenant Commander Zeftos appeared beside their pod, his skin patterns showing deep confusion. "Cadet Chen, explain your tactical reasoning for the initial deployment." Marcus looked up at the Aquarian officer, recognizing the sharp intelligence behind the translated words. This was not a casual question from an instructor, but a probing inquiry from a veteran who understood warfare at a level far beyond most academy staff. "The raiders were using modified hegemony tactics," Marcus explained calmly. The spiral approach is designed to concentrate maximum firepower on a single target while maintaining formation coherence. By positioning our heavy assets at oblique angles, we created a kill zone that the raiders couldn't avoid once they committed to their attack. And how, exactly, did you identify hegemony formations from such limited sensor data? Zeftos asked, his skin now rippling with patterns Marcus didn't recognize. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel Lyra's intense gaze, could sense the attention of nearby students who had overheard the conversation. He had revealed too much again, demonstrated knowledge that no first-year student should possess. Historical analysis, he said finally. I've studied extinct military doctrines as a hobby. The approach patterns matched documented hegemony raids from the archive wars. Zeftos's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus now realized was skepticism. The archive wars' tactical records remain classified at the highest levels of galactic security. They are not available to civilian researchers. Silence stretched between them while Marcus scrambled for a response that wouldn't reveal more than he intended. The truth was that he had fought against neo-hegemony forces during the Zerathi War, had studied their tactics not from historical records, but from bitter experience gained in dozens of ship-to-ship engagements. Earth maintains extensive military archives, he said carefully. Our government provided access to historical documents when they selected candidates for the Academy program. It was a plausible explanation, but Marcus could see that Zeftos wasn't entirely convinced. The Aquarian officer studied him for several more seconds before moving on to observe other student teams. That was incredible, Lyra whispered once they were alone. I've never seen tactical analysis like that, not even from senior students. Where did you really learn to command like that? Marcus began shutting down their command pod, his movements methodical and practiced. Like I told the lieutenant commander, I studied historical battles. Earth has a very detailed military history. No, Lyra said firmly, her forearms reaching out to stop him from leaving. I've worked with human exchange students before. They're enthusiastic and creative, but they don't have that kind of cold precision. You weren't analyzing that battle, Marcus. You were remembering it. The accusation hit closer to home than Marcus cared to admit. He had indeed been remembering, drawing on painful lessons learned when failure meant the extinction of his entire species. The calm that his classmates found so unusual wasn't natural serenity, but the hard-won composure of someone who had carried the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders. I don't know what you mean, he said, but even he could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Lyra's silver eyes held his gaze steadily. I've been watching you since classes began, Marcus. You move through the academy like someone who's seen it all before. You speak about military theory like someone who's lived it. And just now, you commanded our fleet like someone who's actually stood on the bridge of a warship under enemy fire. Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the simulation chamber. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red while automated voices announced a priority alert. Through the chamber's viewports, Marcus could see Academy staff running through the corridors with obvious urgency. Lieutenant Commander Zeftos appeared on the chamber's main display, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled tension. All students returned to quarters immediately. The Academy is now under lockdown protocols. This is not a drill. As students began filing out in confused groups, Lyra caught Marcus's arm. This conversation isn't over, she said quietly. I don't know who you really are, but I intend to find out. Marcus nodded, understanding that his carefully maintained cover was beginning to crack. As he walked back through the Academy's corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past was finally catching up with him. The calm he had worked so hard to cultivate suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the growing certainty that his secrets wouldn't stay buried much longer. The weight of his true identity pressed down on him like a familiar burden, reminding him that no matter how far he ran or how carefully he hid, he would always be the man who had saved humanity through methods that still haunted his dreams. Outside the Academy's viewports, unknown ships began appearing on the edge of sensor range, their configurations disturbingly familiar to anyone who had studied the tactics of humanity's ancient enemies. The Academy's corridors buzzed with nervous energy as students huddled in small groups, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electronic tones. Marcus sat alone in his dormitory, watching through his small viewport as the unknown fleet continued to gather at the system's edge. The ships held position just beyond the range where detailed scans could identify their origins. But something about their formation made his stomach clench with recognition. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Marcus opened it to find Lyra standing in the corridor, her silver eyes bright with curiosity and determination. "May I come in?" she asked, though she was already stepping past him into the small room. Marcus's quarters were sparse by academy standards. Where other students had personalized their spaces with cultural artifacts and family images, his contained only the basic furnishings and a small collection of books, actual paper books that had drawn curious glances from his alien classmates. "Interesting reading material," Lyra observed, examining the titles on his shelf. "Sun Tzu, von Clausewitz, Mahan, Zheng He. These are all ancient Earth military theorists." "I told you I was interested in military history," Marcus replied, settling into his desk chair while Lyra perched on the edge of his bed with the casual flexibility of her species. "Yes, you did. But look at these books, Marcus. They're not digital copies or even reproductions. These are original publications, some of them centuries old, the kind of books you'd find in a private collection, not a student's luggage." Marcus remained silent, recognizing the trap she was laying. Lyra was clearly more perceptive than he had given her credit for, and her observations were uncomfortably accurate. "I've been doing some research," she continued, producing a small data pad from her utility belt. "Earth's first contact with galactic civilization was only 3 years ago, but your species adapted to interstellar politics remarkably quickly. Almost as if you'd had practice dealing with hostile alien civilizations." The viewport behind Marcus flickered as another ship materialized at the edge of the system, its configuration angular and predatory. He forced himself not to react, but Lyra caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "You're watching those ships like you recognize them," she observed. "The same way you recognize those hegemony formations in today's simulation." Marcus stood and moved to the viewport, ostensibly to get a better look at the gathering fleet, but really to avoid Lyra's penetrating gaze. The ships were maintaining perfect formation discipline, their positioning speaking to a level of tactical coordination that few modern military forces could achieve. "Tell me about the Zarathi War," Lyra said suddenly. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He spun around to face her, his carefully maintained composure cracking for just an instant before reasserting itself. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice carried a flatness that contradicted his words. "The Zarathi War," Lyra repeated, consulting her datapad. "It's mentioned briefly in Earth's first contact documentation, listed as a recent conflict that ended just before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. But the details are classified, even from basic historical summaries." She stood and approached him, her forearms moving in gestures that indicated intense concentration. "What's interesting is that several galactic military databases contain references to unprecedented tactical innovations observed in the Outer Rim territories around the same time period. New formations, communication protocols, and command structures that appeared seemingly overnight and then disappeared just as quickly." Marcus felt the walls of his carefully constructed new life closing in around him. "You're reaching, Lyra, drawing connections that don't exist." "Am I?" She activated her datapad's holographic display, showing a tactical diagram that made Marcus's breath catch. "This is a recreation of something called the Cascade Formation, observed by hegemony remnant forces 3 years ago. They described it as completely revolutionary, unlike anything in recorded military history." The diagram showed a formation Marcus knew intimately, one he had developed during the darkest days of the Zarathi War, when humanity's survival hung by the thinnest of threads. Seeing it displayed so casually made him feel exposed and vulnerable in ways he hadn't experienced since the war's end. "The interesting thing about this formation," Lyra continued, "is that it requires a level of real-time tactical coordination that most species simply cannot achieve. The neural processing speed, the ability to track multiple variables simultaneously, the split-second decision-making, it all suggests a commander with capabilities far beyond normal parameters." Before Marcus could respond, his room's communication system activated with an urgent priority signal. Commander Saren's voice filled the small space, carrying the kind of barely controlled tension that experienced military personnel recognized immediately. "All Academy personnel, this is Commander Saren. We are currently in contact with an unidentified fleet that has entered our system. Initial communications suggest they are seeking an individual with specific knowledge of human military capabilities. All students are to remain in quarters until further notice. The communication ended, leaving Marcus and Lyra staring at each other in the sudden silence. Through the viewport, the unknown fleet had moved closer, close enough for Marcus to make out details that confirmed his worst fears. "Those are Zarathi ships," he said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Lyra's eye stalk snapped toward him with laser focus. "How could you possibly identify Zarathi vessels? According to galactic records, no Zarathi ships have been encountered for over 50 years. Marcus moved to his small storage locker and began pulling out items that clearly didn't belong to a student. A military-grade communication device, encrypted data crystals, and finally, a small metallic object that made Lyra's breathing slits flare with recognition. "Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. Marcus held the object up to the light, its surface reflecting the badge of humanity's highest military decoration. The Grand Admiral's star was awarded only for actions that preserved the entire species from extinction. In human space, it was the rarest and most respected honor possible. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said, his voice carrying a weight that filled the small room. "But 3 years ago I was Grand Admiral Marcus Chen, Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Force." Lyra sat down hard on his bed, her forearms trembling slightly. "You're him. You're the architect." The nickname made Marcus wince. The galactic intelligence community had coined it after analyzing reports of the unprecedented, tactical innovations that had turned the tide of the Zarathi War. They had theorized that humanity possessed a military genius whose strategic thinking operated on levels beyond conventional understanding. "Was a soldier doing his job," Marcus said simply. "Nothing more. Nothing more." Lyra's voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Cascade Formation alone saved 3 colony worlds from total annihilation. The Zarathi were winning until you took command. They had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and centuries of military experience. By every rational calculation, humanity should have been extinct within 6 months. Marcus returned to the viewport, watching the Zarathi fleet with eyes that had seen too much. "We survived because we had to, because the alternative was unthinkable." "You survived because you revolutionized military doctrine overnight," Lyra corrected. "The reports described tactical innovations that shouldn't have been possible. Command structures that operated like living organisms. Formations that adapted in real time to enemy responses. Strategies that seemed to predict enemy actions before they were made." The communication system activated again, but this time it carried a different voice, speaking in the guttural tones of the Zarathi language. Marcus's expression hardened as the words registered, his body language shifting in ways that transformed him from mild student to dangerous predator in the span of seconds. "What are they saying?" Lyra asked, noting his sudden transformation. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, translating the alien words in his mind. "They're not here for just any human with military knowledge," he said finally. "They're here specifically for me. They know who I am, and they want revenge for what I did to their invasion force." Through the viewport, the Zarathi fleet began moving into attack formation, their ships spreading out in patterns that Marcus recognized from countless nightmares. The Academy's defensive systems came online, but everyone aboard knew that their educational facility was no match for a dedicated military force. "They followed me here," Marcus whispered, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. "I thought I could leave the war behind, but it followed me anyway." Lyra stood and moved beside him at the viewport, her silver eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked at her, then at the approaching enemy fleet, then at the academy around them filled with innocent students from dozens of species. The calm that had defined his time here was gone, replaced by the cold calculation that had once made him the most feared human commander in known space. "I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago," he said, reaching for his communication device. "I'm going to finish what I started." Marcus activated his encrypted communication device with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving across controls that most Academy personnel wouldn't recognize. The device hummed to life, establishing a secure quantum channel that bypassed all standard Academy communications protocols. "Authorization code Omega 77 Alpha," He spoke into the device, his voice carrying the crisp authority of his former rank. "This is Architect Prime requesting immediate priority contact with Terra Command." Lyra watched in fascination as the device projected a small holographic interface, displaying encryption algorithms and security protocols that were clearly far beyond standard Academy technology. Within seconds, a response came through in crisp, professional tones. "Architect Prime, this is Terra Command. We show your location as Nexus Academy. Please confirm your status." "Status is compromised," Marcus replied, moving to his storage locker and beginning to extract equipment that transformed his appearance from student to soldier. "Zarathi Pursuit Force has located my position. Academy is under immediate threat." A longer pause, then a different voice, older and carrying the weight of high command. "Admiral Chen, this is General Morrison. We've been tracking Zarathi movement in that sector."
"How did they find you?"
Marcus paused in his equipment checks, considering the question. During his time at the Academy, he had been careful to maintain perfect operational security, using only his cover identity and avoiding any actions that might reveal his true nature. Yet somehow the Zarathi had tracked him across half the galaxy to this remote educational facility. "Unknown, General, but they're here and they're not interested in negotiation. I count at least 40 ships in their formation, including heavy cruisers and what appears to be a command dreadnought." Lyra's breathing slits flared with alarm. A Zarathi command dreadnought was the kind of vessel that could reduce an entire planet to molten slag. The Academy's defensive systems were designed to handle pirates and minor threats, not a full military assault. Admiral Terra Command is mobilizing relief forces, but our nearest fleet elements are 18 hours out. Can the Academy hold that long? Marcus looked through his viewport at the approaching Zarathi fleet, his tactical mind automatically calculating firing solutions, approach vectors, and defensive capabilities. The numbers were not encouraging. "Negative, General. Academy defenses are minimal, and the facility was never designed to withstand this level of assault. We have maybe 2 hours before they reach optimal firing position. Then I suggest you remember why you're called the Architect." General Morrison's voice carried grim determination. "Terra Command has full confidence in your abilities, Admiral. Do what you do best." The communication ended, leaving Marcus alone with Lyra and the weight of impending battle. He finished donning his equipment, tactical gear that transformed his appearance completely. Gone was the mild-mannered student, replaced by a figure that radiated competence and dangerous capability. "Lyra, I need you to get to the Academy's emergency shelters," Marcus said, checking the charge on a weapon that definitely hadn't been part of his student luggage. "Things are about to get very dangerous." "I'm not going anywhere," she replied firmly, her forearms crossed in a gesture of absolute determination. "If you're the Architect, then I want to see how you're planning to save us all." Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his eyes carried the cold fire that had made him legendary throughout human space. "This isn't a simulation, Lyra. People are going to die today." "People are going to die anyway if the Zarathi break through," she countered. "But maybe fewer of them will die if I help you." Before Marcus could argue further, the Academy's emergency communication system activated with Commander Saren's voice. Though this time he sounded far less composed than usual. "All personnel, this is Commander Saren. The approaching fleet has been identified as hostile Zarathi forces. They have demanded the surrender of a specific individual in exchange for allowing the Academy to evacuate. All defensive systems are now active, and we are attempting to negotiate additional time for evacuation procedures." Marcus moved to his communication console and activated the Academy's internal command frequency, using override codes that shouldn't have existed in any student's possession. "Commander Saren, this is Chen. I need immediate access to all Academy tactical systems and full command authority over defensive operations." "Cadet Chen, how are you accessing command frequencies? And what do you mean by command authority?" "Commander, there isn't time for explanations. The Zarathi are here for me, and I'm the only person on this station with the experience to coordinate an effective defense. I need you to trust me." A pause, then Commander Saren's voice returned, carrying a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. "Cadet Chen, your personnel file shows no command experience beyond basic Academy training." Marcus looked at Lyra, who nodded encouragingly, then made a decision that would change everything. "Commander, my real name is Admiral Marcus Chen, formerly Supreme Commander of the Human Defense Force. I am the officer responsible for humanity's victory in the Zarathi War, and I am the person they've come here to find." The communication channel went silent for several long seconds. Through his viewport, Marcus could see the Academy's defensive platforms coming online, their weapon systems turning toward the approaching enemy fleet with mechanical precision. Admiral Chen, Commander Saren's voice finally returned, now carrying the respect and deference due to someone of Marcus's actual rank. "All Academy systems are now at your disposal. How do you want to proceed?" Marcus moved to his room's tactical display, activating systems that most students never knew existed. The Academy's complete defensive layout appeared before him, showing weapon emplacements, shield generators, fighter bays, and the positions of all personnel. "First, I need complete evacuation of all non-essential personnel to emergency shelters. Second, I want all Academy instructors with military experience reporting to combat stations. Third, I need someone to activate the Academy's emergency beacon and broadcast our situation to any Galactic Council forces in the area." "Understood, Admiral. What about the Zarathi demands for your surrender?" Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind already working through dozens of possible scenarios and counter-moves. The Zarathi fleet was approaching in a classic siege formation, designed to overwhelm fixed defenses through concentrated firepower. It was an effective strategy, but like most Zarathi tactics, it had weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood their operational doctrine. "Tell them I'll consider their proposal after they move their fleet to minimum safe distance from the Academy," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across the tactical controls. "That should buy us maybe 30 minutes while they debate whether I'm actually going to surrender." Lyra watched as the tactical display, filled with movement indicators showing Academy personnel moving to emergency positions. "You're not actually planning to surrender, are you?" Marcus looked at her with the ghost of a smile, the first genuine expression of humor she'd seen from him since their conversation began. "Lyra, I didn't survive the Zarathi War by giving up when the odds looked bad. I survived by making the enemy think they knew what I was going to do. Right up until the moment I did something completely different." The Academy shuddered slightly as its defensive shields came to full power, creating a protective barrier around the facility. Through the viewport, the Zarathi fleet continued its approach, their ships spreading out in attack formation with the mechanical precision that had once made them the terror of the Outer Rim territories. "So, what are you really planning?" Lyra asked. Marcus turned back to the tactical display, his expression hardening into the mask of concentration that had once struck fear into the hearts of humanity's enemies. "I'm going to remind the Zarathi why they spent 3 years hunting for me across half the galaxy," he said quietly. "And I'm going to show them that some prey is more dangerous when cornered." The first Zarathi probe missiles appeared on the Academy's sensors, moving in fast to test the defensive system's response capabilities. Marcus watched them approach with the patience of a predator, waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal that the mild-mannered student they had been hunting was about to become their worst nightmare all over again. The Academy's command center had been transformed into a military operation in the span of minutes. Marcus stood at the central tactical display, his hands moving across controls with the fluid precision of someone who had commanded fleets in actual combat. Around him, Academy instructors, who had served in various galactic military forces, worked at their stations with growing confidence as they recognized the competence of their unexpected commander. Commander Saren approached Marcus with a mixture of respect and disbelief, still evident in his posture. "Admiral, our defensive platforms are fully operational and all non-combat personnel are secured in emergency shelters. However, our fighters are primarily training craft, not combat vessels." Marcus nodded without taking his eyes off the tactical display, where the Zarathi fleet had spread into a perfect siege formation. "Understood, Commander. I'm not planning to engage them in conventional combat anyway. What's our status on communication with the attacking fleet?" "They're demanding a response to their surrender ultimatum within the next 15 minutes, Saren replied. "Their fleet commander is someone called Warlord Kethvar, apparently the same Kethvar who commanded their forces during the final battles of your war with them." The name made Marcus's jaw tighten slightly. Warlord Kethvar had been responsible for the massacre at New Geneva, an action that had cost humanity nearly 1 million civilians and had driven Marcus to develop some of his most ruthless tactical innovations. "He's here for revenge," Marcus said quietly. This isn't just about military strategy for him. It's personal. Lyra, who had positioned herself at a secondary tactical station despite Marcus's protests, looked up from her displays. The probe missiles they sent are pulling back. They're not testing our defenses anymore. Marcus studied the movement patterns on his display, recognizing the tactical shift. They've learned what they wanted to know. Kethvar is moving to his final attack formation. Time for me to have that conversation. He activated the Academy's main communication array, opening a channel to the Zarathi flagship, the main display filled with the image of Warlord Kethvar, his reptilian features scarred by old battles and his eyes burning with the kind of hatred that could drive a warrior across half the galaxy seeking revenge. So, Kethvar spoke in accented but clear galactic standard. The great architect finally shows his true face. I have spent 3 cycles hunting for the coward who destroyed my armada. Warlord Kethvar, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had once coordinated humanity's defense. I see you've managed to scrape together another fleet. I'm impressed you found ships willing to follow someone with your track record. Kethvar's features twisted with rage. You think your clever words will save you here, human? You are trapped in a fixed position with minimal defenses. There will be no miraculous escape this time. Marcus smiled, the expression holding no warmth whatsoever. You know, Kethvar, that's exactly what you said at the Battle of Kepler Station, right before I turned your invasion fleet into scrap metal. This time is different, Kethvar snarled. This time you have nowhere to run. No fleet to command, no clever formations to save you. You will surrender yourself to face justice for your crimes, or I will reduce your pathetic academy to atoms. And what crimes would those be? Marcus asked, his tone conversational despite the deadly circumstances. Defending my species from unprovoked aggression? Protecting human colonies from your cleansing operations? You violated the rules of civilized warfare. Kethvar's voice rose to a roar. Your tactics were without honor, without mercy. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. You want to talk about honor, Kethvar? You opened fire on civilian evacuation ships at New Geneva. You ordered the bombardment of hospitals and schools. You made it very clear that this was a war of extermination, not conquest. Those were acceptable casualties in a legitimate military operation. No, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the command center stop what they were doing to listen. Those were the actions that taught me I was fighting, an enemy that had forfeited any right to mercy or restraint. The communication channel crackled with tension as the 2 commanders faced each other across the void. Behind Kethvar, Marcus could see the bridge of the Zarathi flagship, filled with warriors eager for revenge against the human who had humiliated their entire species. You have 5 minutes to surrender yourself, Kethvar finally said. After that we begin bombardment. Understood, Marcus replied. But before you attack, let me ask you something. How many ships did you lose at the Battle of Kepler Station? What does it matter now? Humor me. How many ships? Kethvar's eyes narrowed with suspicion. 47 vessels. Nearly my entire fleet. And how many ships do you have with you today? Enough to finish what we started? Marcus nodded thoughtfully. 41 ships by my count, including that beautiful command dreadnought you're speaking from, the Vengeance of Zerath, if I remember the intelligence reports correctly. How do you know the name of my flagship? Marcus's smile returned, and this time it carried genuine amusement. Because, Warlord Kethvar, for the past 3 years, human intelligence has been tracking every move you've made. Every ship you've acquired, every base you've established, every plan you've developed to hunt me down. The alien commander's confident posture wavered slightly. Impossible. We maintained perfect operational security. Did you? Marcus turned to his tactical display, activating systems that began highlighting specific ships in the Zarathi formation. Tell me, how long has the cruiser Silent Death been part of your fleet? Kethvar looked confused by the apparently random question. 8 months. We acquired her from mercenary forces in the Rigel sector. Ah, Marcus nodded. And the destroyer Night Hunter? 6 months, Kethvar replied, his voice growing uncertain. Marcus turned back to face the alien commander on the display. Would you be interested to know that both ships have been broadcasting their positions to human intelligence for their entire time in your service, along with detailed information about your fleet composition, planned routes, and tactical discussions? The blood drained from Kethvar's scaled features. You're lying, am I? Marcus activated another control, and the Academy's communication array began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Almost immediately, responses came from what appeared to be empty space around the Zarathi fleet. This is Admiral Harrison aboard the Defiant. All human vessels report status. Admiral Chen, this is Captain Rodriguez on the Retribution. Stealth systems disengaging on your mark. Lightning standing by, Admiral. Ready to engage on your order. One by one, nearly 30 human warships materialized around the Zarathi fleet, their advanced stealth systems dropping to reveal a force that had been lying in wait for exactly this moment. The Academy hadn't been a helpless target. It had been bait in a trap 3 years in the making. Warlord Kethvar stared at his tactical displays in growing horror as his hunters became the hunted. This is impossible. Our sensors showed empty space. Human stealth technology has improved significantly since our last meeting, Marcus said conversationally. We've had 3 years to prepare for your inevitable attempt at revenge. Did you really think I would come to the Academy without making arrangements for my own security? The Zarathi fleet found itself surrounded, outnumbered, and completely outmaneuvered by an enemy they had thought was helpless. On the Academy's tactical displays, Marcus could see Zarathi ships beginning to maneuver desperately, trying to find some way out of the trap they had flown into. You have 30 seconds to surrender your fleet, Marcus announced, his voice now carrying the full authority of his former rank. After that, I will demonstrate why the Zarathi war ended the way it did. Kethvar's expression cycled through rage, desperation, and finally, a kind of grudging respect for the human who had outmaneuvered him one final time. You truly are the architect, he said quietly. Even in defeat, you turn the tables on your enemies. Warlord Kethvar, Marcus said, his voice gentling slightly, this doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. The war is over. Surrender your fleet, and your warriors can return home to rebuild instead of dying in a pointless gesture of revenge. For a moment it seemed as though the Zarathi commander might accept the offer. Then his features hardened with the stubborn pride that had driven his species to near extinction. A warrior's death in battle is preferable to a coward's life in surrender, he snarled, reaching for his ship's firing controls. Marcus sighed, recognizing the inevitable. So be it, all human vessels engage at will. Try to minimize casualties, but protect yourselves first. The space around the Academy erupted in brilliant flashes of weapons fire as two fleets clashed, in the kind of battle that would be studied in military academies for generations to come. But this time, Marcus observed, the outcome was never really in doubt. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Marcus coordinated the human fleet with the same precision that had made him legendary during the Zarathi War, his tactical commands flowing across multiple frequencies as 30 human warships engaged the Zarathi force with devastating efficiency. The Academy's command center had become the nerve center for an operation that demonstrated everything the galaxy's military establishments had theorized about human tactical capabilities. Admiral Harrison, bring the Defiant around to intercept their cruiser formation. Captain Rodriguez, I need the Retribution to target their command ship's weapon systems only. I want Kethvar alive if possible. The battle unfolded across the Academy's tactical displays like a deadly dance, with human ships moving in coordination patterns that seemed almost telepathic in their precision. The Zarathi fleet, caught completely off guard and surrounded, fought with desperate courage but found themselves systematically dismantled by opponents who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this confrontation. Lyra watched the tactical display with fascination and growing understanding. This is how you won the war, isn't it? Not just through brilliant tactics, but through intelligence operations that took years to develop. Marcus nodded without taking his attention off the battle coordination. The Zarathi are excellent warriors, but they think in terms of individual battles. Humans learned long ago that wars are won through logistics, intelligence, and strategic planning that extends far beyond any single engagement. Through the Academy's viewports, the results of that planning were clearly visible. Zarathi ships exploded in brilliant flowers of light as human weapons found their targets, but Marcus noticed that his commanders were following his instructions about minimizing casualties. Ships were being disabled rather than destroyed when possible. Escape pods were being allowed to launch, and medical vessels were being protected rather than targeted. Vengeance of Zirath is losing power to her main weapon systems, reported Captain Rodriguez over the communication channel. Should we close for boarding? Negative, Marcus replied. Maintain distance and prepare for surrender negotiations. Warlord Kethvar has too much pride to give up easily, but he's not stupid enough to sacrifice his entire fleet for nothing. As if summoned by Marcus's words, Kethvar's image reappeared on the Academy's main display. The Zarathi commander's bridge showed obvious battle damage, with smoke drifting across damaged control stations and injured crew members receiving medical attention. Architect, Kethvar said, his voice carrying a mixture of defeat and grudging respect. Your trap was perfectly executed. My tactical advisors estimated a less than 5% probability that you would be able to coordinate such an operation. Your tactical advisors underestimated human patience, Marcus replied. We don't just plan for the battle we're fighting today. We plan for the war we might have to fight tomorrow. Kethvar studied Marcus through the communication channel, his reptilian features showing an emotion that might have been curiosity. Tell me, human, was any of it real? Your time at this academy, your apparent desire for peace? The question caught Marcus off guard with its perceptive insight. He glanced around the academy's command center, taking in the faces of instructors and students who had been drawn into this confrontation through no fault of their own. All of it was real, he said finally. I came here because I wanted to learn how to build something instead of just destroying things. I wanted to understand how the galaxy might work together instead of constantly fighting. And yet you were prepared for war anyway. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. Through the viewports, he could see the debris from damaged Zarathi ships drifting in the Academy's vicinity, a reminder of the violence that seemed to follow him regardless of his intentions. I've learned that wanting peace and being prepared for war aren't contradictory positions, he said. Sometimes the only way to achieve the first is to be ready for the second. Kethvar's image flickered as his ship's power system struggled to maintain communication protocols. My fleet is defeated, Architect. My warriors look to me for guidance. What terms do you offer? Marcus looked at the tactical display, where the remaining Zarathi ships had ceased offensive operations and were maintaining defensive positions around their damaged flagship. 17 Zarathi vessels remained functional out of the original 41, a devastating defeat by any military standard. Immediate cessation of hostilities, Marcus said. Your wounded will receive medical attention from Academy facilities. Your ships will be escorted to the nearest neutral port, where you can arrange for repairs and safe passage home. And the price for this mercy? No price, Marcus replied, surprising everyone in the command center. The war is over, Kethvar. It ended 3 years ago. This was just settling old accounts. The Zarathi commander stared at Marcus through the communication channel, clearly trying to understand the human mindset that could offer mercy to an enemy who had come seeking revenge. There is one condition, Marcus continued. You and I need to have a conversation, face to face aboard a neutral vessel, with no weapons and no warriors. Just two old soldiers talking about how to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Kethvar's scarred features showed genuine surprise. You would trust a meeting alone with me? I've been trusting that meeting for 3 years, Marcus replied. It's why I made sure you would eventually find me in circumstances where we could end this properly. Commander Saren approached Marcus's position, his expression showing the kind of respect reserved for legendary figures. Admiral, the galactic media networks have been monitoring the battle. Word is spreading throughout known space about what happened here. Marcus winced slightly. How much of my identity has been compromised? I'm afraid all of it, sir. The Academy's records, the battle footage, your coordination of the human fleet, it's all being broadcast across multiple star systems. By tomorrow, every major government in the galaxy will know that the Architect has been hiding at Nexus Academy. The weight of that revelation settled over Marcus like a familiar burden. His carefully constructed new life as a student was over, destroyed by the very skills that had saved humanity during its darkest hour. The calm, peaceful existence he had tried to build was being replaced by the notoriety that came with being one of the galaxy's most famous military commanders. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her silver eyes reflecting sympathy and understanding. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know this isn't what you wanted. Marcus looked around the command center one more time, taking in the faces of people who would now see him differently, who would know him as the Architect rather than simply as Marcus the quiet student. No, he said finally, it's not what I wanted, but maybe it's what the galaxy needs. Through the communication channel, Kethvar had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding, so the great architect was trying to disappear into obscurity, trying to become just another student learning to build instead of destroy. Something like that, Marcus admitted. Kethvar was quiet for several seconds, then spoke with something approaching wisdom. Perhaps, architect, your presence at this academy was not about hiding from your past, but about preparing for your future. The galaxy has many conflicts, many species who cannot seem to learn how to coexist peacefully. Marcus met the alien commander's gaze through the display, beginning to understand what Kethvar was suggesting. You think there's more work for someone like me to do? I think, Kethvar said carefully, that the skills which made you a great destroyer of your enemies might also make you a great builder of peace, if you were willing to apply them to that purpose. The conversation was interrupted by alerts from the Academy's communication systems as priority messages began arriving from governments, military commands, and news organizations throughout known space. The secret was out, and the galaxy wanted to know what the architect planned to do next. Marcus looked at the messages, then at the tactical display showing human and Zarathi ships maintaining careful truces around the academy, then at the faces of his fellow students and instructors who were seeing him with new eyes. Well, he said to no one in particular, I guess we'll find out what comes next together. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the newly constructed Galactic Conflict Resolution Center, watching through the massive viewports as representatives from 17 different species arrived for what the media had dubbed the Architect Summit. The facility had been built in neutral space, specifically designed for the kind of diplomatic work that Marcus had never imagined himself doing. The Academy had changed him, and the revelation of his identity had changed the galaxy's perception of what might be possible when military genius was applied to building peace rather than waging war. The hegemony. Remnants have agreed to attend, Lyra reported, approaching with a datapad full of updates. She had become his chief diplomatic coordinator, using her natural talents for analysis and her four-armed multitasking abilities to manage the complex logistics of galactic diplomacy. And the Zarathi response? Marcus asked, reviewing the seating arrangements for what would be the largest interspecies peace conference in recorded history. Warlord Kethvar will represent their delegation personally. He says he's curious to see whether you're as good at building peace as you were at winning wars. Marcus smiled at that. His relationship with the former Zarathi commander had evolved into something resembling mutual respect over the months since their battle at the academy. Kethvar had proven to be a valuable ally in convincing warrior cultures that strength could be demonstrated through restraint as well as violence. Admiral Chen, Commander Saren, approached, his demeanor still carrying the deference that had developed since learning Marcus's true identity. The Galactic Council representatives have arrived. They're requesting a private meeting before the formal sessions begin. Marcus nodded, straightening his uniform. The simple Academy cadet outfit had been replaced by the formal dress uniform of a Galactic Diplomatic Corps admiral, a rank that had been created specifically for him after his appointment as Director of Interspecies Conflict Resolution. The private meeting took place in a smaller conference room, designed to accommodate the various environmental needs of different species. The Galactic Council's delegation included representatives from 12 major civilizations, all of whom regarded Marcus with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and carefully concealed nervousness. Chancellor Vethmorn, the Council's senior diplomat, spoke first. Admiral Chen, we want to express our gratitude for your efforts in organizing this conference. However, we must ask about the rather unusual methods you've employed in your diplomatic work. Marcus settled into his chair, recognizing the careful phrasing that diplomatic professionals used when they wanted to discuss something controversial. I assume you're referring to the incident with the Rigelian mining dispute? Among others, Chancellor Vethmorn replied. Your solution to that conflict involved positioning a human battle fleet in the disputed system and offering to resolve the matter through what you called competitive negotiation under controlled conditions. It worked, Marcus pointed out. Both sides agreed to arbitration rather than risk a three-way battle, and the mining rights were divided equitably. Yes, but the threat of overwhelming force is not typically considered a diplomatic tool. Marcus leaned back slightly, considering his response. Over the past 6 months, he had developed what his staff privately called the architect approach to diplomacy, combining traditional negotiation techniques with strategic demonstrations that convinced potential combatants that peaceful resolution was in their best interest. "Chancellor," he said finally, "I've learned that most conflicts arise when one or both sides believe they can achieve their objectives through violence more easily than through negotiation. My job is to change that calculation." A new voice entered the conversation as Ambassador Krelth, representing the militaristic Draconian Federation, leaned forward. "Your methods are certainly effective, Admiral, but they require resources that most diplomatic missions don't possess. Not everyone has access to fleets of human warships." "True," Marcus acknowledged, "but the principle can be applied with other resources. Economic incentives, technological exchanges, territorial concessions, all of these can be structured to make cooperation more attractive than conflict." "Like the Centaurian trade dispute?" asked Ambassador Zeftal, her aquatic features showing what Marcus had learned to recognize as approval. "Your solution there was quite innovative," Marcus nodded. "The Centaurian situation had been particularly complex, involving 3 species competing for access to rare minerals in a system that all 3 claimed as ancestral territory. Traditional diplomacy had failed because each species had valid historical claims and the economic stakes were enormous. The breakthrough came when we stopped thinking about the dispute as a zero-sum competition," Marcus explained. "Instead of fighting over who had the right to extract the minerals, we created a joint development corporation with shared ownership and rotating management. Everyone got access to the resources, and the profits were distributed based on contribution rather than territorial claims." Chancellor Vethmorn consulted her notes. "The preliminary report suggests that model could be applied to dozens of similar disputes throughout the galaxy." "That's the goal," Marcus replied. "Most interspecies conflicts follow predictable patterns. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, cultural misunderstandings that escalate into violence. Once you understand the underlying patterns, you can develop systematic approaches to resolution." The meeting continued for another hour, covering Marcus's various diplomatic successes and the concerns of council members about his unconventional methods. By the end, it was clear that while his approaches raised eyebrows among traditional diplomats, they produced results that spoke for themselves. As the delegation filed out, Ambassador Krelth lingered behind. "Admiral, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, and do you miss it?" "The clarity of military command, the straightforward nature of tactical problems." Marcus considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "military problems have clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Diplomatic problems are messier, more complex, and the victories are often partial rather than complete. Then why continue with this work?" Marcus moved to the conference room's viewport, looking out at the various ships that had brought delegations to the summit. Each vessel represented a species with its own history, culture, and perspective on how the galaxy should work. "Because," he said finally, "building something is harder than destroying it, but it's also more important. I spent 3 years learning how to defeat humanity's enemies. I'd like to spend the rest of my life learning how to turn enemies into allies." Ambassador Krelth nodded with understanding. "The Academy changed you. The Academy taught me that there were other ways to solve problems besides superior firepower and tactical brilliance. It showed me that strength can be measured in terms other than victory in battle." Later that evening, Marcus walked through the Academy's corridors during a brief return visit. The facility looked much the same as when he had been a student, though there were now security measures in place that reflected his celebrity status among the galactic community. He found Professor Kethvar in the same classroom, where he had first demonstrated his knowledge of the Kandorian pincer formation. The insectoid instructor looked up as Marcus entered, his compound eyes reflecting what might have been amusement. "Admiral Chen," Professor Kethvar said, "I understand congratulations are in order. The preliminary reports from your summit suggest remarkable progress on several long-standing disputes." "It's a start," Marcus replied, taking a seat in what had once been his regular chair. "We're learning that most conflicts can be resolved when all parties understand the real costs and benefits involved. And when they believe that peaceful resolution is possible," Professor Kethvar added. "Your reputation certainly helps in that regard." Few beings are willing to risk conflict with someone who defeated an entire species in open warfare. Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering the young man who had sat in this same chair just over a year ago, desperately trying to hide from a past that had followed him across the galaxy. Professor, do you think people can really change? Can someone who was designed by circumstances to be a destroyer learn to be a builder instead? Professor Kethvar's mandibles clicked, and what Marcus had learned was the equivalent of a thoughtful expression. I think, Admiral, that you are asking the wrong question. You were never just a destroyer. You were a protector who learned to destroy when protection required it. Now you are a protector who is learning to build because protection requires it. The Academy's calm human student, Marcus said with a slight smile, remembering Lyra's early observations about his demeanor. Yes, Professor Kethvar agreed, though I suspect that calmness was never really about being peaceful. It was about being confident in your ability to handle whatever challenges arose. Marcus stood and moved toward the door, then paused to look back at the classroom where his new life had truly begun. Thank you, Professor, for seeing potential instead of just problems. Thank you, Admiral, for proving that even the galaxy's most brilliant commander can still learn new ways to serve. As Marcus left the Academy and returned to his ship for the journey back to the Conflict Resolution Center, he reflected on the strange path that had brought him from military commander to diplomatic innovator. The galaxy still had conflicts that needed resolution, species that needed to learn how to coexist, and problems that required both tactical thinking and creative solutions. But now he had allies instead of just soldiers, partners instead of just subordinates, and goals that involved building rather than just surviving. The calm that had once been a mask to hide his lethal capabilities had become something genuine, the serenity of someone who had found his true purpose in life. The architect had learned to build, and the galaxy was becoming a more peaceful place because of it. In the distance, stars continued to shine with the promise of new challenges and new opportunities to prove that wisdom could be more powerful than weapons, and that the greatest victories were achieved not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of what all people truly wanted: security, prosperity, and hope for the future. Marcus smiled as his ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying him toward whatever diplomatic challenge awaited next. The Academy's calm human student had finally found his place in the galaxy, and it was exactly where he belonged.